Alex Vance wiped sweaty palms against the fabric of what Earth's diplomatic corps had assured him was appropriate formal attire for an audience with the Queen of the Xylar Empire. The garment, a blend of ceremonial Earth diplomacy uniform and elements supposedly inspired by Xylarian fashion, felt stiff and ill-fitting, much like Alex felt in his role. Remember, Chief Ambassador Wong had told him during his extremely brief preparation, "This is a simple matter. Just get Queen Lyra to approve the adjustment to the trade route through the Kepler sector. It's a minor concession for them, but critical for Earth's shipping lanes. Simple, of course. Just convince the ruler of the most technologically advanced, militarily superior empire in 3 sectors to change a treaty point because Earth wanted it. And they'd send Alex, a junior linguist with barely 2 years of experience in extraterrestrial dialects and exactly 0 diplomatic experience. The grand entrance to the throne room loomed before him, a towering arch of what looked like liquid metal constantly flowing upward, somehow defying gravity while maintaining structural integrity. 2 Xylarian royal guards flanked the entrance, their exoskeletal armor gleaming with a blue-green iridescence that matched their skin. They regarded Alex with compound eyes that revealed nothing of their thoughts. "The Queen will receive you now," announced a tall Xylarian in flowing robes who had appeared silently beside Alex, making him jump. "The protocol officer," Alex presumed. "You will approach to the 3rd marking on the floor, bow in the manner you have been instructed, and speak only when addressed." Alex nodded, his throat suddenly too dry for words. The massive doors, or what functioned as doors, parted like a liquid membrane, and he was ushered inside. The throne room of Queen Lyra defied human architectural understanding. The ceiling soared impossibly high, creating an illusion of infinite space. The walls seemed to be alive, pulsing with faint bioluminescence that shifted in patterns too complex to follow. The floor beneath his feet was perfectly transparent in some places, revealing what appeared to be a living ecosystem of strange aquatic creatures far below, while other sections were solid and marked with intricate symbols that glowed when stepped upon. And there, at the far end, seated upon a raised platform that seemed to float unsupported, was Queen Lyra of the Xylar Empire. Alex had seen images, of course. All diplomatic personnel had studied the basic materials on the ruling monarch of humanity's most powerful ally/potential threat. But no recording could capture the presence of the Xylarian queen. She was tall, even for her species, with a characteristic blue-green skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Unlike other Xylarians, whose bodies maintained a relatively humanoid form despite their alien features, the royal bloodline had evolved, or perhaps engineered themselves, into something more ethereal. Her limbs were elongated and graceful, adorned with intricate patterns that might have been tattoos or might have been natural markings. Her face maintained a delicate symmetry, with high cheekbones and large, almond-shaped eyes that shifted colors as she moved. But what truly set her apart was the crown. Not a piece of jewelry, but a series of translucent, crystalline structures that emerged directly from her skull, catching and refracting light in hypnotic patterns. She wore armor that seemed more ceremonial than practical, fitted to her form and made of a material that resembled mother of pearl, but was undoubtedly far stronger. When she moved, even slightly, the entire room seemed to adjust to accommodate her. "Alexander Vance of Earth," she spoke, her voice carrying a harmonic quality that human vocal cords could never replicate. "You come before us with a petition." Alex swallowed hard and bowed as instructed, painfully aware of how clumsy the human gesture must appear to Xylarian sensibilities. "Yes, Your Majesty. I bring greetings from Earth and a request regarding the Kepler sector trade route agreement." Her eyes, currently a deep purple, narrowed slightly. "A trade route agreement that was finalized 3 solar cycles ago. An agreement that your government approved with full understanding of its terms." "Yes, Your Majesty. However, recent developments in the stability of the Orion Passage have necessitated." "Recent developments?" she interrupted, leaning forward slightly. "The degradation of the Orion stellar pathway, was predicted by our astronomers over 20 cycles ago. Your species' refusal to acknowledge our scientific findings at that time is not an emergency on our part. Alex felt sweat forming at his hairline. This was going exactly as badly as he'd feared. Your Majesty, I believe there may have been a misunderstanding during the initial consultations. There was no misunderstanding, she cut in again, her voice acquiring a dangerous edge. Your diplomats considered our warnings to be exaggerated. Your scientists claimed the pathway would remain stable for another century, at minimum. Your merchants insisted on the longer route because it allowed them to avoid our regulatory checkpoints. Alex opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. He was so thoroughly unprepared for this level of directness. The briefing materials had described Queen Lyra as reserved, logical, and known for her patience with less advanced species. The monarch before him seemed none of those things at the moment. Perhaps I could clarify Earth's position, he tried again, desperately wishing he'd been given more information. The adjustment we're requesting is minimal, merely a 10-degree shift in the approved corridor that would allow our ships to bypass the now unstable Orion sector without adding significant journey time. The Queen's crystalline crown caught the light as she tilted her head slightly. And why should the Xylar Empire accommodate this request when your world has repeatedly declined our offers of technological assistance that would have made your vessels capable of navigating the disturbance? Alex blinked. No one had mentioned any offers of technological assistance. Well, hadn't they told him? Because he began, then faltered. He had no good answer. The logical part of his brain was screaming at him to retreat, to request time to consult with Earth. But some instinct told him that showing such weakness now would only make matters worse. So he went with honesty, abandoning his scripted approach. Your Majesty, I apologize, but I was not informed of these previous offers. I was sent here with incomplete information, which I now realize demonstrates either incompetence or disrespect on our part. Neither is excusable. Something flickered across the Queen's alien features. Surprise, perhaps? You admit your world's failure? She asked, her tone difficult to interpret. I admit that I personally am unprepared for this conversation, and that my government has apparently handled this situation poorly. But the need remains real. Without access to an alternate route, many Earth settlements in the outer colonies will face severe supply shortages within months. She studied him for a long moment, the color of her eyes shifting from purple to a deep blue. You speak more directly than your predecessors, Alexander Vance. Yet I see no reason why we should rectify your species' errors in judgment. Alex felt desperation rising. He thought of the colonies, millions of people whose lives depended on stable supply lines. In that moment of panic, his mind latched onto a bizarre comparison. Your Majesty, on Earth, we have a saying about toasters and tacos. The Queen's expression did not change, but somehow the quality of her stillness shifted. Explain. Alex wanted to kick himself. What was he doing? But he was committed now. Toasters are devices for heating bread. Tacos are a type of food wrapped in a folded shell. They have nothing in common. They're made differently, used differently. But sometimes, the best innovations come from combining things that don't naturally go together. He was speaking faster now, nervous energy propelling his words. Earth and Xylar might seem as different as toasters and tacos, but working together, we can create something neither would imagine alone. There was a long, excruciating silence. The royal guards shifted slightly, their armor making soft, clicking sounds. Several court officials exchanged glances that Alex couldn't interpret. Then, unexpectedly, the Queen spoke. Your analogy is incomprehensible. Alex's heart sank. However, she continued, your willingness to appear foolish in pursuit of your objective demonstrates a certain commitment. Was that a good thing? Alex couldn't tell. Tell me, Alexander Vance, why do you personally advocate for this adjustment? What stake do you have in this matter? The question caught him off guard. Why did she care about his personal investment? But something told him this might be his only opening. I care about the people who will suffer if we can't resolve this. I believe that relations between Earth and Xylar can be better than they have been. I believe that he stumbled over his words, his anxiety peaking. I love. The word slipped out before he could stop it, a catastrophic verbal fumble brought on by stress and the intensity of the Queen's gaze. I love you, he blurted, then immediately froze in horror. The entire throne room went deathly still. Alex could feel the blood draining from his face. Had he just committed an interstellar diplomatic incident? Was this an unforgivable insult in Xylarian culture? Was he about to be executed on the spot? The Queen rose from her throne in one fluid motion, her armor catching the light in ripples. The guards tensed, their hands moving to weapons. Court officials stepped back, expressions unreadable but postures clearly alarmed. Queen Lyra descended the floating steps of her dais with deliberate grace, each footfall silent despite her armored form. She approached Alex, who remained rooted to the spot, unable to move, barely able to breathe. When she stood before him, towering over his human frame by at least a foot, she leaned down slightly, her iridescent features now close enough that he could see the subtle patterns shifting beneath her skin. And then, in a voice so quiet that only he could hear, she whispered a single word. Finally, Alex's mind went completely blank. What did that mean? Finally? Finally what? Before he could form a coherent thought, let alone a response, the Queen straightened and turned to her court. Leave us, she commanded. All of you. The assembled Xylarians bowed in perfect unison and withdrew without question or hesitation, including the guards. Within moments, the massive throne room contained only Alex and the Queen of the most powerful empire in known space. She turned back to him, her eyes now a shade of turquoise he hadn't seen before. Alexander Vance of Earth, she said, her tone entirely different from the imperial coldness of moments ago. You will join me for a private discussion this evening. My attendants will collect you at the turning of the third moon. Alex managed to find his voice, though it emerged as little more than a squeak. Your Majesty, I apologize for my inappropriate. She raised a hand, silencing him instantly. We will discuss everything then. For now, you are dismissed. As he backed away, maintaining the required protocol despite his confusion, she added, and Alexander, do not attempt to contact your government about our conversation. This matter is now between us alone. He nodded, still too shocked to question the instruction, and fled the throne room as gracefully as his trembling legs would allow. What had he done? And more importantly, what did finally mean? Alex paced the guest quarters he'd been assigned within the royal palace, alternating between panic, confusion, and a strange, inexplicable curiosity that he couldn't quite suppress. The rooms were beautiful in an alien way, designed to accommodate human biological needs while maintaining Xylarian aesthetic principles. The result was simultaneously comfortable and disorienting, much like his current situation. I told the Queen of the Xylar Empire that I love her, he muttered to himself for perhaps the 20th time, running hands through his already disheveled hair. And she said, finally, and now I'm having dinner with her. This can't be happening. But it was happening, and as the third moon, a small, greenish satellite, appeared on the horizon through his transparent wall/window, a soft chime announced the arrival of the royal attendants. They were Xylarians of a slightly different phenotype than the Queen, shorter, with skin leaning more toward teal than blue-green, and eyes that were uniformly amber rather than color-shifting. They bowed respectfully and gestured for him to follow without speaking a word. The journey through the palace was like walking through a living dream. Corridors shifted configuration as they passed, architecture that seemed to anticipate their needs and respond to their presence. Bioluminescent life forms provided gentle illumination, pulsing in patterns that somehow evoked both tranquility and watchfulness. Finally, they arrived at what must have been the Queen's private dining chamber, a space utterly unlike the imposing throne room, where that had been designed to intimidate. This room seemed created for comfort, though still undeniably alien. The ceiling was a perfect recreation of the night sky above, but with each star slightly larger, brighter, more present than in reality. The walls were alive with subtle movement, Not the dramatic pulsing of the throne room, but a gentle flow, like watching underwater plants sway in a mild current. And there was Queen Lyra, transformed. She had removed her ceremonial armor and crown, though the crystalline structures emerging from her skull remained, of course. She wore what must have been the Xylarian equivalent of casual attire. Flowing fabrics and colors that shifted subtly as she moved, somehow both substantial and ethereal. Without the armor adding bulk and height, her true form was revealed as slender and graceful, though still imposingly tall by human standards. "Alexander," she greeted him, gesturing to a seat across from her at a low table. "Please join me." Alex approached cautiously and attempted to sit on what appeared to be a cushion, but behaved more like a semi-solid cloud, nearly causing him to tumble backward. He caught himself just in time, but felt his face flush with embarrassment. The Queen made a sound, a series of harmonic tones that took Alex a moment to identify as laughter. "Human balance is not calibrated for Xylarian furnishings," she observed. "An oversight in my preparations. I apologize." "No, please, Alex began, then stopped as an attendant adjusted something in the cushion, causing it to firm up to a more human-friendly consistency. "Thank you," he said, finally settling into a relatively dignified position. "You may leave us," the Queen told her attendants, who bowed and withdrew silently. Once they were alone, an awkward silence fell. Alex stared at the table, which appeared to be made from a single piece of material that might have been wood, might have been stone, might have been neither. "You are wondering about what I said," Queen Lyra stated rather than asked. Alex looked up, meeting her gaze directly for perhaps the first time. Her eyes were now a warm amber color, less intimidating than the purple of the throne room. "Yes, Your Majesty. I am confused. Understandably so." She made a gesture, and portions of the table's surface began to reconfigure, rising to form serving platforms with various containers and implements. "We will discuss it, but first we shall eat." "Are you familiar with Xylarian cuisine?" "Only in theory," Alex admitted. "We received basic briefings on compatibility with human digestion, but I've never actually had the opportunity to try it." "Then this will be educational for both of us," she said, selecting what appeared to be a utensil that resembled a cross between a spoon and a small musical instrument. "I have studied human nutritional requirements extensively, but practical application is always more informative than theory." Alex watched in fascination as she used the utensil to activate rather than merely serve the food. Touching it to various dishes caused them to change color, texture, and presumably flavor. When she handed him his own utensil, it adjusted its size to fit his smaller hand. He attempted to mimic her movements. His first attempt resulted in a dish turning an alarming shade of purple and beginning to emit a low humming sound. "Ah," the Queen said quickly, reaching across to tap the dish with her own utensil, immediately silencing the humming. "Perhaps I should have mentioned that the harmonic resonance of the serving implements affects the food's molecular structure. Your natural frequency is different." Alex set down the utensil carefully. "I'm sorry. I don't want to ruin the meal." "You haven't," she assured him, and then did something unexpected. She served him herself, preparing each dish with precise movements before placing it before him. In Xylarian culture, this would be considered extremely intimate, she explained, seeing his surprise. But under the circumstances, it seems appropriate. The food itself was an adventure in conflicting sensory experiences. Things that glowed weren't hot. Things that appeared solid dissolved like cotton candy. Flavors transformed halfway through chewing. Some were delicious by human standards, others merely interesting, and one or two required all of Alex's diplomatic training not to spit out immediately. Throughout the meal, they engaged in careful conversation, the Queen asking about Earth customs, Alex attempting to explain concepts like dessert and breakfast food to someone whose species apparently consumed nutrients in a completely different pattern. "So you intentionally create foods with no nutritional value, designed only to stimulate pleasure receptors?" she asked, genuinely fascinated by his description of chocolate cake. "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous," Alex laughed, surprising himself with how comfortable he suddenly felt. But yes, essentially, don't Xylarians have foods they eat purely for enjoyment? She considered this. The concept of separating nutrition from pleasure is foreign to us. Our bodies process what they need from any food, converting the rest to energy for our secondary biological systems. To create food that serves no biological purpose would be. She searched for a word, inefficient. Inefficiency is practically a human art form, Alex said with a smile. We specialize in doing things simply because they're enjoyable, not because they're practical. Like declaring love to a planetary ruler during a diplomatic negotiation, she asked, her tone light, but her gaze suddenly intense. And there it was, the conversation they'd been circling around. Alex set down his utensil. Your Majesty. Lyra, she corrected. When we are alone, you may call me Lyra. Lyra, he repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on his tongue. About what I said in the throne room. It was a terrible mistake. A slip of the tongue caused by nervousness and... Was it? She interrupted, her eyes shifting to a deep, midnight blue. A mistake? Or was it truth spoken before it was recognized as such? Alex stared at her, completely at a loss. I don't understand. She rose from her seat in a single fluid motion and moved to what appeared to be a wall panel. With a touch, the wall became transparent, revealing a breathtaking view of the capital city below. Spires of impossible architecture illuminated by the 3 moons and countless lights that moved in patterns too ordered to be random, too complex to be easily understood. Being queen of the Xylar Empire is... She paused, searching for words, isolating. I was engineered from birth for this role. Genetically, psychologically, socially. My education was not merely comprehensive. It was all-consuming. I have 714 advisors, 9,322 direct subjects within the palace alone, and theoretical authority over 18 billion sentient beings across 27 star systems. She turned back to face him. And yet, despite being constantly surrounded, I am utterly alone. Do you know why? Alex shook his head, transfixed. Because no one sees me. They see the queen, the office, the institution. They see the culmination of 10,000 years of genetic refinement and political evolution. They see a symbol. Her voice remained measured, but Alex could hear something beneath it, something remarkably like loneliness. In Xylarian culture, relationships, particularly for royalty, are strategic alliances carefully arranged to strengthen political ties and optimize genetic combinations. That sounds clinical, Alex ventured. It is efficient, she corrected, but without conviction. Until recently, I accepted this as the natural order. Then, 3 years ago by her calendar, I encountered something unexpected. She touched another panel, and a holographic display appeared between them. It showed what appeared to be a recording of a much younger Alex, giving a presentation at what he recognized as an academic conference on comparative xenolinguistics. He watched, mortified, as his past self stumbled through an earnest but clearly novice analysis of emotional inflection patterns in Xylarian formal speech. This was you, was it not? She asked. Yes, he admitted, fighting the urge to sink under the table. My doctoral presentation. It was not my finest moment. It was fascinating, she countered. You were the first human to recognize that our formal speech patterns contain emotional markers, subtle but present. Every other human analyst had concluded that Xylarians suppress emotion in formal contexts. You argued the opposite, that our formal speech is actually more emotionally nuanced, simply in ways humans had failed to perceive. Alex remembered the presentation and the generally lukewarm reception it had received. Most of my professors disagreed with my conclusions. Your professors were wrong. You were right. She dismissed the hologram with a gesture. I had that recording sent to me by one of our cultural attaches who attended the conference. I found it compelling. I began following your work. When Earth requested these trade route negotiations, I specifically asked that you be included in the delegation. Alex's mind reeled. But I'm just a junior linguist. I have no diplomatic standing. Precisely why I requested you, she said, returning to the table, but remaining standing. I wanted someone who would speak truth rather than diplomatic platitudes. Someone who might see me, not merely the throne. And my embarrassing declaration of love fit into this plan how? Exactly? Alex asked, unable to keep a hint of sarcasm from his voice. It did not, she admitted, and he was astonished to see the color of her skin shift slightly, a deeper blue suffusing her features in what he suddenly realized might be the Xylarian equivalent of a blush. But your unguarded honesty, even in error, was refreshing in a way I cannot adequately express. Do you know how long it has been since anyone has spoken to me without calculating every word for advantage? I definitely didn't calculate that particular phrase, Alex muttered, then paused as a realization struck him. Wait, when you said finally, before she could respond, a sharp tone echoed through the room, and a section of the wall illuminated with symbols Alex couldn't read. Lyra's posture changed instantly, imperial authority replacing the more relaxed demeanor of moments before. A security alert, she explained, moving quickly to the panel. Something has triggered the planetary defense grid. Alex stood, unsure what to do. Should I leave? No, she said firmly, manipulating the controls with practiced efficiency. This concerns you as well. The symbols rearranged themselves, forming patterns that seemed to distress the queen, though her expression remained controlled. What is it? Alex asked. The Kryvax, she replied grimly, a species from the Outer Rim, notorious for raiding vulnerable shipping lanes. They appeared to be targeting a convoy. She paused, her eyes narrowing as she read something. A human convoy, attempting to navigate the unstable Orion Passage. The very route we were discussing, Alex realized. Those must be Earth ships try to make the journey despite the instability. Lyra nodded, already activating what appeared to be a communication system. They're being pursued by 3 Kryvax raider vessels. The convoy has entered Xylarian space, seeking protection under the treaty, but our nearest patrol is 20 minutes from intercept. She issued a series of commands in rapid Xylarian that Alex could only partially follow, something about mobilizing defense forces and calculating intercept trajectories. We must go to the command center, she told him when she'd finished. Now, before Alex could respond, a section of floor beneath them began to reconfigure, forming what appeared to be a transport platform. Lyra stepped onto it and gestured for him to join her. The moment he did, the platform began to descend rapidly through the building. Why am I coming? Alex asked, gripping a handrail that had thoughtfully formed beside him. Because if we must communicate with the human vessels, your expertise may be valuable, she replied, though something in her tone suggested there might be more to it than that. The command center of the Xylarian Defense Forces was a marvel of biotechnology and engineering that under other circumstances would have left Alex speechless with scientific curiosity. At the moment, however, he was too preoccupied with the unfolding crisis to appreciate the living computer interfaces and neural-linked control systems. Queen Lyra stepped directly into what appeared to be a command nexus, a raised platform surrounded by 3-dimensional displays showing the position of the ships, the unstable region of space, and the approaching Xylarian patrol vessels. Status, she demanded. A Xylarian officer, distinguished by neural implants more extensive than those of the subordinates, stepped forward. The human convoy consists of 5 transport vessels, lightly armed. The Kryvax have damaged the propulsion system of the trailing ship and are attempting to force the others to halt. Why would they attack ships in Xylarian space? Alex asked. Isn't that basically a declaration of war against the Empire? The officer gave him a look that somehow conveyed disdain despite the alien features. The Kryvax believe we are overextended, that our response time to this remote sector will be too slow to catch them. They intend to strike and retreat before we can mobilize a significant force. Are they correct? Lyra asked sharply. Not entirely, the officer replied. We can have interceptors there in 18 minutes. But the damaged human vessel will be captured before then. Lyra studied the tactical display. That is unacceptable. Prepare my personal shuttle. The command center went silent. The officer stared at her in what was clearly shock. Your Majesty, protocol expressly forbids. I'm aware of protocol, Commander, she cut him off. I'm also aware that my shuttle is equipped with experimental phase shift technology that can reach the convoy in under 5 minutes. Prepare immediately. The officer bowed stiffly. Yes, Your Majesty. As preparations were made, Alex approached Lyra cautiously. You're going personally? Is that wise? It is necessary, she replied without looking away from the displays. The Kryvax must understand that violations of Xylarian space will be met with the full force of Imperial authority. Nothing communicates that more clearly than my personal presence. And am I staying here? He asked, assuming the answer was obvious. No, she said, surprising him. You're coming with me. If we need to communicate with the human vessels, your assistance will be valuable. That explanation made sense, but Alex suspected there was more to it. Something in her tone suggested she had additional reasons for wanting him along. Before he could press further, officers approached to inform them that the shuttle was ready. This shuttle, as it turned out, was a sleek vessel that would have been considered a major warship by Earth standards. Its organic-looking hull pulsed with energy patterns that made Alex's eyes hurt if he looked at them too long. Have you ever experienced phase shift travel? Lyra asked as they boarded. I've never even heard of it, Alex admitted. Then this will be educational, she said, leading him to what appeared to be the bridge, a surprisingly small chamber where the control interfaces were largely neural rather than physical. Alex was directed to a seat that immediately conformed to his human physiology. Restraints grew from the seat itself, securing him in place. These are necessary, Lyra explained, taking the central position. Phase shifting creates temporary discontinuities in conventional physics. Your body will remain intact, but the sensation can be disorienting. That's not ominous at all, Alex muttered. Around them, the crew, a small, elite team by the look of their specialized neural implants, prepared for departure. Lyra herself, connected directly to the ship's systems through interfaces that extended from her command chair and linked to the crystalline structures of her crown. Phase generators at optimal capacity, reported an officer. Exit vector calculated. Awaiting your command, Majesty. Lyra's eyes shifted to a brilliant, electric blue that Alex hadn't seen before. Engage. What followed was the most terrifying 5 minutes of Alex's life. The phase shift drive didn't appear to move the ship through space so much as partially remove it from conventional reality. The sensation was like being simultaneously stretched across an infinite distance and compressed into a single point. Colors existed that had no names, sounds felt solid, and time itself seemed to stutter and skip. When they emerged, Alex was profoundly grateful for the restraints as his body attempted to simultaneously collapse and flail in response to the disorientation. First exposure is always difficult, Lyra said, her voice penetrating the fog in his brain. Breathe deeply. It will pass. As his senses gradually realigned, the tactical situation came into focus on the displays around them. They had arrived at the perfect intercept point directly between the damaged Earth vessel and the pursuing Kryvax raiders. Open communications, Lyra commanded. All frequencies, all languages. A moment later, her voice rang with imperial authority. Attention, Kryvax vessels. This is Queen Lyra of the Xylar Empire. You have violated sovereign Xylarian space and attacked vessels under our protection. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded or be destroyed. The response was immediate, not surrender, but aggression. The Kryvax vessels, realizing they were trapped, launched a desperate attack on the royal shuttle. Predictable, Lyra said coldly. Defensive measures only. I want at least one of their ships intact for interrogation. What followed was less a battle than a demonstration of overwhelming technological superiority. The Xylarian shuttle's defensive systems neutralized the Kryvax weapons with contemptuous ease, while precisely targeted counterstrikes disabled 2 of the 3 raider vessels without destroying them. The third, however, attempted a kamikaze run directly at the shuttle. "Brace for evasive maneuvers," called out the pilot, but Alex could see they wouldn't be fast enough. The Raider had activated some kind of propulsion override, accelerating well beyond safe parameters on a collision course. In that moment, several things happened at once. The shuttle's defensive AI identified the threat and prepared to vaporize the incoming vessel. Lyra, recognizing that this would kill potential prisoners and intelligence sources, began to countermand the order. And Alex, acting purely on instinct, called out, "Wait, the atmospheric vents." All eyes turned to him momentarily, including Lyra's, now a startled gold color. "Their engines are overloading, but their atmospheric systems are still active," he explained rapidly, pointing to a detail on the display that as linguists I had caught, a pattern of emissions from the Kryvax ship. "Those aren't weapon signatures. They're venting reactor plasma through their life support systems to manage the overload. Target those vents, and you'll disrupt the engine sequence without destroying the ship." There was a split-second pause, then Lyra nodded sharply. "Do it." The tactical officer, looking skeptical but following orders, adjusted the targeting parameters. A precisely calibrated energy pulse struck the Kryvax vessel exactly where Alex had indicated. The effect was immediate. The ship's wild acceleration ceased, its power systems visibly cycling down on the monitors. "How did you know that would work?" Lyra asked, turning to Alex with genuine curiosity. "I didn't. Not really," he admitted. "But I've studied Kryvax communication patterns, and their technical terminology often links life support and propulsion systems conceptually in ways that suggested a physical connection. It was just a guess that saved lives, both ours and theirs," she noted, something like respect in her tone. The rest of the operation proceeded efficiently. The Xylarian patrol ships arrived to secure the disabled raiders, while engineering teams were dispatched to assist the damaged Earth vessel. Throughout it all, Lyra remained in direct command, demonstrating a level of tactical acumen and decisiveness that left Alex both impressed and slightly intimidated. It was only later, as they prepared to return to the capital, that she found a moment to speak with him privately. "You functioned well under pressure," she observed. "Better than many experienced officers I've commanded." "Blind panic sometimes looks like courage from the outside," Alex replied with a self-deprecating smile. "No," she said firmly. "It was not panic that I observed. It was clarity. You saw a pattern that trained warriors missed, and you acted decisively." She paused, studying him with eyes that had shifted to a deep, thoughtful green. "Perhaps there is something to be said for your human inefficiency, after all." The journey back was less disorienting than the outbound trip. Whether because Alex was better prepared or because the ship's engineers had adjusted the phase variance for his comfort, he couldn't tell. Either way, he found himself able to maintain consciousness and even basic conversation throughout the transit. As they approached the capital, Lyra received a communication that caused her expression to tighten. "The Kryvax incursion has created diplomatic complications," she informed him. "The Galactic Council has called an emergency session to address the security breach. As both Xylar and Earth are involved, representatives from both worlds are required to attend." "Shouldn't Earth send a proper diplomat?" Alex asked. "I'm just a linguist who accidentally got involved in all this." "You are now much more than that," Lyra replied enigmatically. "You are the human who stood beside the Queen of Xylar during a military engagement, who contributed to the successful resolution of the crisis. Your presence at the council will be symbolic." Alex wasn't sure he liked the sound of that, but he had little choice in the matter. Events were moving far beyond his control, sweeping him along in their wake. The Galactic Council convened in a neutral space station positioned at the gravitational balance point between three major stellar powers, a massive, wheel-shaped structure that housed diplomatic missions from over 200 sentient species. Its central chamber was an architectural marvel, designed to accommodate beings from worlds with vastly different atmospheric requirements, gravity preferences, and physical forms. As Alex and Queen Lyra entered together, he was acutely aware of the stir their joint appearance created. Representatives from a dozen worlds turned to observe them, communications implants buzzing with activity as information and speculation spread throughout the assembly. "They're talking about us," Alex murmured, fighting the urge to shrink behind the Queen's taller form. "Of course they are," Lyra replied calmly. "The Xylar Sovereign rarely attends council sessions in person, and never before with a human at her side." A delegation approached, 3 humans in formal Earth diplomatic attire, led by a stern-faced woman Alex recognized as Undersecretary Constance Blackwell, one of Earth's highest-ranking representatives to interstellar affairs. "Your Majesty," she greeted Lyra with a perfect diplomatic bow, then turned a considerably cooler gaze on Alex. "Mr. Vance." One unexpected development. Undersecretary. Alex returned the greeting, trying to match her professional tone despite his internal panic. "I've been assisting Queen Lyra in matters related to the Kryvax incursion." "So, I've heard," Blackwell replied, her tone making it clear that she'd heard considerably more than that. "Perhaps we should discuss the nature of your assistance in private before the session begins." Before Alex could respond, Lyra interjected smoothly. "I'm afraid there isn't time, Undersecretary. The session is about to commence, and Linguist Vance will be seated with the Xylarian delegation as my special advisor." Blackwell's professionally neutral expression slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine shock. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, Mr. Vance is an Earth citizen and a junior member of our diplomatic corps. His proper place is with our delegation." "His proper place," Lyra countered, her voice taking on the harmonic edge that Alex now recognized as a sign of strong emotion, "is where I have determined it to be, unless Earth wishes to formally object to my choice of advisors." The underlying threat was clear. Blackwell straightened, her expression hardening. "Of course not, Your Majesty. We simply wish to ensure proper protocols are observed." "I assure you, they will be," Lyra said with finality, then swept past the Earth delegation, gesturing for Alex to follow. "That could have gone better," Alex whispered once they were out of earshot. "It went precisely as expected," Lyra replied. "Your government is concerned about losing control of the narrative. They sent you here with incomplete information and insufficient authority, expecting failure. Instead, you become unexpectedly influential. They find this threatening." Alex wanted to argue, but couldn't. Everything she said matched his growing suspicions about why he'd been selected for the original mission. The council session itself was a masterclass in interstellar politics. The Kryvax representatives, currently confined to a secure diplomatic chamber under guard, claimed the incursion was a misunderstanding, that they had merely been pursuing pirates who had violated their own territory. The Earth delegation argued that their ships had entered Xylarian space legally under treaty provisions due to the emergency caused by the Orion instability, and various other powers used the opportunity to advance their own agendas, from those seeking stricter border controls to those advocating for expanded free travel zones. Throughout it all, Queen Lyra remained impassive, speaking rarely but with devastating effect when she did. Alex found himself fascinated by her diplomatic skill, so different from her more direct approach in private. During a brief recess, they retreated to a smaller chamber reserved for the Xylarian delegation. Once the doors sealed, creating a secure environment, Lyra's posture relaxed marginally. "Your Earth representatives are being deliberately obstructive," she observed, moving to a console that displayed the current diplomatic positions of the various factions. "They're embarrassed," Alex suggested. "The convoy entered the unstable region against Xylarian warnings, just as you said they would. Now, they're trying to save face, at the expense of a resolution that would benefit their own people," Lyra noted with what sounded like genuine puzzlement. "Is this typical of your species' governance?" "Unfortunately, yes," Alex sighed. "Pride often overrules practicality. Speaking of which, I should warn you, there's a member of our delegation, Minister Chun, who has a particular dislike for the Xylar Empire. He blames your people for a trade dispute that damaged his family's shipping business decades ago." Lyra tilted her head, her eyes shifting to a curious yellow. "How do you know this?" "It wasn't in your briefing materials." "Office gossip," Alex admitted. "I make a point of listening to the administrative staff. They know all the real stories behind the official narratives. She considered this an unconventional but effective intelligence strategy. Thank you for the information. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of First Minister Thelix, a high-ranking Xylarian official whose crystalline crown structures marked him as a distant relation to the royal bloodline. He bowed deeply to Lyra, but cast a distinctly hostile glance toward Alex. Your Majesty, he began in formal Xylarian, clearly assuming Alex wouldn't understand the more complex dialectical forms. I must express concern regarding the human's presence in our strategic discussions. His loyalty is naturally to his own kind. Alex kept his expression neutral, pretending not to comprehend, while mentally translating the minister's words with relative ease. Your concern is noted, First Minister, Lyra replied in the same formal dialect, but linguist Vance has proven his value. His insights into both human psychology and Kryvax communication patterns have been invaluable. With respect, Majesty, Felix persisted, there are rumors circulating about the nature of your interest in this human. Such associations could undermine your authority at a critical diplomatic juncture. Alex felt his face grow warm despite his efforts to maintain a neutral expression. Lyra's eyes shifted to a dangerous violet shade. You overstep, First Minister. My associations are not subject to council approval or ministerial opinion. Felix bowed again, deeper this time. I speak only out of loyalty to the crown, Majesty. The royal bloodline has remained pure for 10,000 years. There are those who would view even the appearance of irregularity as deeply troubling. Those concerned with appearances rather than outcomes may find their advisory positions reconsidered, Lyra replied coldly. You are dismissed, First Minister. After Thelix departed, Lyra turned to Alex, her eyes still violet. You understood every word, didn't you? Most of it, he confirmed, though some of the honorific declensions were a bit beyond my training. A small smile touched her lips. Your comprehension of our formal dialect is impressive. Another skill you've hidden. Not hidden, Alex corrected. Just never had the chance to demonstrate. No one ever expected me to understand the royal dialect. Just as no one expected you to affect interstellar politics, she observed. Yet here we are. There was something in her tone, a warmth, a familiarity, that made Alex's heart beat faster. Emboldened by everything they'd been through, he decided to ask the question that had been burning in his mind. About what you said earlier, when you whispered finally, he began. Lyra's eyes shifted to a deep, midnight blue. You wish to know what I meant? Yes. I've been trying to understand. She moved to the viewport that looked out over the vast expanse of space, stars gleaming against the void. For a long moment, she was silent, and Alex feared she wouldn't answer. There's a concept in ancient Xylarian philosophy, she finally said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. Keflara. The closest translation in your language might be recognized soul. It describes a connection that transcends conventional understanding, a recognition that occurs not just between minds, but between essential natures. She turned to face him. For 10,000 years, the royal bloodline has been carefully cultivated, marriages arranged for genetic and political advantage. Every aspect of a sovereign's life is predetermined, controlled, designed to serve the empire's needs. This has brought stability and advancement to our civilization, but at a cost few acknowledge. Isolation, Alex guessed, remembering their earlier conversation. Yes. Her eyes were now a blue so deep they seemed to contain galaxies. There is an ancient prophecy, or perhaps merely a story told to royal children, that speaks of a sovereign who would find their Keflara in an unexpected place, with one who speaks truth without calculation, who sees beyond the crown to the being beneath. This union would bring renewal to a bloodline grown too rigid, too predictable. Alex's throat felt dry. And you believe I'm this person from the prophecy? I believe nothing with certainty, she said carefully. But when you spoke those words in the throne room, words no Xylarian would ever dare speak to the sovereign, I felt something I had never experienced before. A recognition, a possibility. She stepped closer to him. When I said finally, I meant that after a lifetime of careful, calculated interactions, someone had finally spoken to me with pure, unfiltered truth, however accidental it might have been. Alex struggled to process her words, his mind reeling with implications. But I'm human. You're Xylarian. There are biological differences, cultural barriers, political complications. All true, she acknowledged. And yet, here you are, a junior linguist who has somehow become central to a galactic diplomatic crisis, who recognized a pattern in Kryvax technology that our military experts missed, who understands our most complex dialect without formal training. Perhaps these barriers are not as insurmountable as they appear. Before Alex could respond, the chamber's communications system chimed, indicating the council session was about to resume. We must continue this discussion later, Lyra said, her posture shifting back to imperial rigidity. For now, we have a diplomatic crisis to resolve. The remainder of the council session was even more tense than the beginning. The Earth delegation, clearly unhappy with Alex's position at Lyra's side, adopted an increasingly obstinate stance on several key points. The Kryvax representatives continued to maintain their innocence, while subtly threatening future incidents if their ships and crews weren't released immediately. And several minor powers began jockeying for advantage, sensing weakness in the traditional Earth-Xylar alliance. As discussions reached a particularly heated moment regarding patrol rights in the disputed region, Alex noticed a pattern in the data being displayed: routes, incidents, response times. Something didn't add up. He leaned close to Lyra and whispered, "The Kryvax attacks aren't random. They're too precisely timed, always occurring when Xylarian patrols are at their furthest points in their rotation. Someone's feeding them your patrol schedules." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, but she gave no other indication of surprise. Instead, she made a subtle gesture to her intelligence officer, who immediately began analyzing the data more closely. Minutes later, the officer returned and whispered something to Lyra that made her crystalline crown structures vibrate with what Alex was beginning to recognize as anger. Without warning, Lyra rose, commanding immediate attention from the entire assembly. "Honored representatives," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber, "I believe we have been addressing the symptom rather than the disease. The Kryvax incursions are not isolated incidents, but part of a coordinated campaign, one that requires inside information about Xylarian security protocols." A murmur ran through the assembly. "Furthermore," she continued, "analysis of communication patterns suggests that this information came from sources within Earth's colonial administration." The Earth delegation erupted in protests, under Secretary Blackwell rising to her feet. "These accusations are outrageous. Your Majesty must provide evidence before making such inflammatory claims." "The evidence is being transmitted to all delegations now," Lyra replied calmly. "A comprehensive analysis of attack patterns correlated with patrol schedules, along with intercepted communications that have been decoded by linguist Vance using his expertise in Kryvax dialectical patterns." Alex managed to keep his expression neutral despite his shock. He had done no such decoding. This was clearly Lyra's strategy to leverage his unexpected status for diplomatic advantage. It was brilliant, if somewhat terrifying. No one would question his capability after his performance during the Kryvax engagement. The data appeared on displays throughout the chamber, and the reaction was immediate. The evidence wasn't just compelling, it was overwhelming. Patterns that seemed obvious once highlighted, communication intercepts that, while not explicitly incriminating any specific Earth officials, clearly showed information flowing from Earth colonial administrations to Kryvax operatives. What followed was a diplomatic masterclass. Rather than pursuing punitive measures against Earth, which would have been her right given the evidence, Lyra instead proposed a joint Earth-Xylar security initiative to address the corruption in the colonial administration. She offered advanced Xylarian detection systems to help Earth identify the compromised officials, while simultaneously securing the expanded patrol rights that had been her original objective. Furthermore, she introduced a revised proposal for the disputed trade route, one that acknowledged the Orion instability while creating a new, secure corridor through Xylarian space that would benefit both Earth shipping and Xylar security interests. It was diplomatic genius, turning what could have been a humiliating exposure of Earth corruption into an opportunity for strength and alliance, while achieving every one of Xylar's strategic objectives. By the session's end, even the skeptical Earth delegation had to acknowledge the elegance of the solution. The Kryvax representatives, their leverage evaporated, were forced to accept terms for the return of their captured vessels that included substantial reparations and stringent monitoring of their future activities. As the council adjourned, Alex found himself surrounded by representatives from various worlds, all suddenly eager to meet the human who had apparently played such a pivotal role in unraveling the Kryvax conspiracy. He fielded their questions as best he could, maintaining the fiction Lyra had created while trying not to commit to specifics that might later be disproven. When he finally extracted himself from the diplomatic crowd, he found Lyra waiting in a private antechamber, her eyes a calm, satisfied green. That, he said as the door closed behind him, was either the most brilliant or most terrifying display of political maneuvering I've ever witnessed. Why not both? She replied, and he was startled to hear what sounded like genuine amusement in her voice. Was I incorrect in my assessment of your abilities? Could you not have decoded those communications had they been presented to you? Probably, Alex admitted. But that's not the point. You've basically drafted me as an intelligence asset without consulting me. Would you have refused if I'd asked? She countered. He paused, realizing she was right. No, I would have helped, but I would have appreciated the courtesy of being informed before being thrust into the center of interstellar espionage. Noted, she said, inclining her head slightly. In the future, I will endeavor to consult you before involving you in matters of galactic security. In the future, Alex repeated, struck by the implications of the phrase. So you anticipate more situations like this? Her eyes shifted to that deep, midnight blue again. I anticipate that our paths are now irrevocably intertwined, Alexander Vance. The question is whether that intertwining is by circumstance or by choice. He understood what she was asking. After everything that had happened, the accidental confession, the crisis, the diplomatic maneuvering, they had reached a turning point. Whatever happened next would set the course for both their futures. When I accidentally said those words in the throne room, he began carefully, they weren't true. Not then. How could they be? I barely knew you. Something flickered in her eyes, disappointment, perhaps. But now, he continued, finding courage he didn't know he possessed, after seeing you command a battleship, outmaneuver seasoned diplomats, and offer mercy when you could have demanded vengeance. Now I'm beginning to understand what those words might actually mean. The color of her eyes intensified, becoming almost luminous. I don't know if I'm your Kethlara from some ancient prophecy, he said honestly. I don't know if what I'm feeling is real or just the result of extraordinary circumstances throwing us together. But I do know that I want to find out. If you're willing to risk it, so am I. For a long moment, Lyra was perfectly still. Even the subtle movements that usually animated her alien features completely ceased. Then, with a grace that seemed to defy physics, she moved toward him, stopping just before they would touch. In 10,000 years of Xylarian history, she said softly, no sovereign has ever taken a non-Xylarian consort. It would challenge traditions as old as our civilization itself. If that's too high a price, Alex began, but she raised a hand, stopping him. I did not say it was. Impossible, she corrected. Merely unprecedented. And perhaps necessary. Civilizations that cannot adapt, cannot evolve, eventually wither and die. The same may be true of bloodlines. She extended her hand, a surprisingly human gesture. This path will not be easy, Alexander Vance. There will be resistance, prejudice, perhaps even danger. Are you certain it is one you wish to walk? Alex looked at her hand, alien in its coloration and proportion, yet somehow perfectly right as it reached for his. Without further hesitation, he took it, feeling the strange, cool texture of her skin against his. I'm not certain of anything, he admitted with a small smile. Except that I'd regret not trying. The return to Xylar was markedly different from their departure. News of the successful diplomatic resolution had preceded them, as had rumors about the unusual relationship between the Queen and the human linguist. As their ship descended toward the royal palace, Alex could see crowds gathered in the public spaces, their mood impossible to gauge from a distance. "What will your people think?" he asked nervously as they prepared to disembark. "About us, I mean." "They will think many things," Lyra replied pragmatically. "Some will see it as an encouraging sign of interspecies cooperation. Others will view it as a concerning deviation from tradition. Most will simply be curious. Humans are still relatively novel to many of my subjects." "In the court? Your ministers?" Her expression hardened slightly. "The court will adapt to their sovereign's will or find themselves seeking opportunities elsewhere. I did not survive 3 assassination attempts and 2 coup attempts in my early reign by allowing ministers to dictate my choices." Alex blinked in surprise. "You never mentioned assassination attempts." "It didn't seem relevant to our previous discussions," she said with what might have been a shrug. "Political violence is an unfortunate reality of governance in any advanced civilization. On Earth, we generally consider assassination attempts pretty relevant information when getting to know someone," Alex noted dryly. A small smile touched her lips. "I shall keep that in mind for future cultural exchanges." As they disembarked, they were met by a formal reception. Imperial guards, court officials, and a surprisingly large contingent of both Xylarian and foreign media representatives. At Lyra's side, Alex fought the urge to shrink from the attention, instead drawing on his newfound confidence to stand tall beside her. The days that followed were a whirlwind of briefings, ceremonies, and increasingly public appearances together. As Lyra had predicted, reactions to their relationship varied widely. Some court officials, like First Minister Thelix, maintained a barely concealed disapproval. Others, particularly younger Xylarians, or those with experience in interspecies diplomacy, showed cautious support or at least pragmatic acceptance. The broader Xylarian public seemed divided along similar lines, with traditionalists expressing concern while progressives celebrated what they saw as an evolutionary step forward for their civilization. Earth's reaction, filtered through diplomatic channels and media reports, was equally mixed, some hailing it as a diplomatic coup that would strengthen humanity's position, others worrying about undue alien influence on Earth's interests. Through it all, Lyra remained unwaveringly certain of her course, neither hiding their relationship nor allowing it to overshadow her duties as sovereign. Alex found himself in the strange position of becoming an unofficial ambassador, fielding questions about human culture, helping to translate nuances that automated systems missed, and gradually carving out a role that had never before existed in the imperial court. Their private moments became precious islands of normalcy in a sea of diplomatic complexity. During these times, they explored the vast differences and surprising similarities between their species and cultures. Lyra introduced Alex to Xylarian art forms that utilized frequencies of light human eyes couldn't perceive, requiring special adaptive lenses for him to appreciate them. Alex taught her Earth card games, which she mastered with frustrating speed despite never having encountered the concept of randomized play before. They also faced practical challenges. Xylarian environments were designed for physiologies different from human needs, requiring adaptations to living quarters, dining arrangements, and even recreational facilities. Some of these adaptations led to humorous misunderstandings, others to moments of touching consideration as each worked to accommodate the other's needs. 6 months after the Kryvax incident, as the political situation had stabilized and their relationship had become an accepted, if still novel, feature of imperial life, Lyra summoned Alex to her private study, a room he'd come to think of as the one place in the palace where she was truly herself rather than the living embodiment of the Empire. "I have been considering our future," she said without preamble as he entered. "That sounds ominous," Alex replied, only half joking. "Not ominous. Practical." She gestured to a display showing complex genetic sequences. My scientists have been studying human Xylarian biological compatibility. The differences are significant, but not insurmountable with appropriate technological intervention. Alex blinked, taking a moment to process her meaning. Are you talking about children? Succession is a fundamental concern for any sovereign, she said matter-of-factly. While my lifespan is considerably longer than yours, it is not infinite. The Empire must be prepared for all eventualities. I hadn't really thought that far ahead, Alex admitted, somewhat overwhelmed by the clinical approach to what humans would consider an intensely personal topic. Lyra's eyes shifted to a softer blue. I apologize. I sometimes forget that your species approaches these matters differently. This was not meant as pressure, merely information. There are many possible paths forward for us. He moved closer to her, taking her hand in a gesture that had become comfortable between them. I'm not opposed to the conversation, just surprised by the timing. On Earth, we typically wait a bit longer before discussing genetic compatibility. How inefficient, she observed with what he now recognized as affectionate teasing. Why waste time building a relationship only to discover biological incompatibility later? Because the relationship is valuable regardless of biological outcomes, he countered gently. Her expression softened. Yes, it is. She paused, then added, there's another matter we must discuss. Earth has formally requested your return for debriefing. Alex felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. When? They suggest next month. I have neither accepted nor denied the request. The choice is yours. Would I be able to return here afterward? He asked, already knowing the answer would be complicated. Politically, it would be difficult to prevent your return if that is your wish, she said carefully. But there would be pressure from your government, from certain factions within my court, to keep you there, to end what some still see as an inappropriate entanglement. Alex considered this. 6 months ago, the thought of never returning to Earth would have been unthinkable. Now, the thought of leaving Xylar, leaving Lyra, felt like contemplating the amputation of a limb. What do you want? Elaborate. Just something to honor my world's traditions as well. Her eyes lightened to a warm azure. A reasonable condition. I accept, as she placed the resonator against his temple, where it adhered with a strange warmth that was neither uncomfortable nor entirely pleasant. Alex reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led to this moment. From a linguistic mistake that should have ended his career to becoming consort to the most powerful monarch in known space. It was beyond anything he could have imagined. The formal announcement of their union sent ripples throughout interstellar society. On Xylar, it was marked by elaborate ceremonies that lasted for days, combining traditional imperial rituals with carefully incorporated Earth customs. The sight of the Queen of Xylar and her human consort exchanging vows in both Xylarian High dialect and English was broadcast across 27 star systems. Earth's response was predictably mixed. Official congratulations combined with unofficial concern, media fascination alongside political wariness. But as the trade benefits of the new alliance became apparent, pragmatism gradually overcame prejudice. The adjusted route through the Orion sector proved to be not just viable, but advantageous for Earth shipping, while Xylarian security forces effectively eliminated the Kryvax threat from the region. 2 years after his accidental declaration in the throne room, Alex stood beside Lyra on the balcony of the Imperial residence, watching the 3 moons rise over the capital city. He wore his resonator as comfortably now as any natural part of himself, his understanding of Xylarian culture and language having deepened to levels few humans had ever achieved. Do you ever regret it? Lyra asked suddenly, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. That slip of the tongue that changed everything. Alex smiled, taking her hand in a gesture that had become their own private symbol of connection. How could I regret the best mistake I ever made? Even with the challenges, the adjustments, the criticism from both our worlds. Especially with those, he said firmly. They've made what we've built together mean something. Worth fighting for. She turned to face him fully, her eyes shifting to that deep, midnight blue that he'd come to treasure. On that day in the throne room, when you spoke those unexpected words, I responded with finally. Do you understand now what I meant? I think so, he said softly. You were waiting for someone to see past the queen to the person beneath. Someone who would speak truth without calculation or agenda. Yes, she agreed. But there was more. The ancient prophecy I mentioned about the sovereign who would find their Kethlara in an unexpected place. It specifically mentioned words spoken in error that would reveal a greater truth. When you said those words, it was as if time itself paused, as if the universe had been waiting for that precise moment. So I fulfilled the prophecy by tripping over my own tongue. Alex laughed softly. Somehow that seems fitting for us. Indeed. She agreed with that subtle expression he'd learned to recognize as her smile. Our union may be unprecedented, but perhaps it was always inevitable. As the moons rose higher, casting their triple shadows across the palace grounds, Alex found himself reflecting on the strange, wonderful path that had led him here. A linguistic mistake, a whispered finally, a journey across stars and cultures to find connection in the most unexpected place. I love you, he said again, this time with deliberate intent rather than nervous error. And just as she had the first time, Lyra leaned close and whispered in response. Finally,